fun hour. I'm here to help, and when I mean help, I'm here to help you in any way that I can. And what we'll judge success as is if you walk out of here having at least one new idea. Okay, that's really what we should do for the next hour is try to have a conversation about what the future of medicine might look like. I'm specifically going to be targeting aspects of interventional radiology and diagnostic radiology. For those of you who are unsure what you are considering for a specialty, this really should be just as applicable. So I can get a sense of the audience. How many of you are first-year medical students? None. Okay. Second year. Wow. All right. And then, are there any third and fourth years? Okay, so we have an audience of second-year medical students, and I remember being a second-year medical student, and I couldn't wait to see patients. I personally found first year of medical school one of the most painful experiences of my life. So I'm not saying that that's how anybody in this room feels about the Krebs cycle, or I just can speak as one person having one experience back in the late 1980s. What I'd like to do today is give you a sense of what the future might look like. And at any time, please stop me, ask questions. And we're going to work really at the intersection between radiology and other specialties too. So this should apply to anyone, no matter what specialty you're considering. I'm going to start with this image. Has anybody heard of this book? Okay. Does anybody read it? No. Okay. This was when I was a kid growing up, and I still am a kid. I read science fiction, and I read a lot of science fiction. This is one of the books that I read when I was maybe in 6th grade, and it was written in the 1960s. It actually was also a movie, and in this science fiction book, there was a very famous scientist who had a stroke. Basically, a thrombus went into his cerebral artery, and he was going to die. And then if he died, the world was going to go awry because he had some answer to fixing the world's ills. And so the characters in the book were also a collection of scientists, and they got miniaturized, and they got injected into the carotid artery, and they went all through the body, went up into the cerebral artery, and they were going to use a laser. Okay, it's always like classic science fiction, a laser, to zap the thrombus, but they had to get out of the body before they would enlarge. And of course, they do this. And, this was one of these corny, it was science fiction. How are you ever going to get into a blood vessel and zap thrombus? That's just kind of weird back in the 1960s. Well, it was science fiction back then. Science fiction has become science fact. We now can literally go anywhere in the body, reach any cavity, reach any blood vessel, and we can treat. We can zap the thrombus, we can inject therapeutics. And so this is an example where something that seemed really out there, one of these, that's just sci-fi, has become science fact. And I'd like to keep that as a theme as we move on. And the field of radiology itself, it's a young field, just over 100 years old. The field of interventional radiology, depending how you define it, is anywhere from 3 decades to 5 decades old. And radiology has often, as a field, it's been working at this really exciting intersection where there's technology, there's innovation, and there's the future. And whether or not you go into radiology or interventional radiology, I think being a physician, it's helpful to want to work at this intersection because you can accomplish so much, and you also can be a kid at heart. You can always try to embed yourself in something that sounds like science fiction and try to make it reality. So if we take our field of interventional radiology and our field of radiology, there's a lot of advances, and they all have this in common. They use a technology to benefit a patient, and you can think about that if you're out, you're playing frisbee, you trip, you fall, you hurt your wrist, you end up going to the emergency room, and what might happen when you have a painful wrist at one point? What's going to almost certainly happen? What test? Yeah, you're going to have an echo. That's just so standard. And so there's stuff that we don't even think about. But really, the X-rays, they're a technology. Now let's go higher end. You have some really complex liver tumor, and you're not a surgical candidate. So what might we do over here? We can inject radioactive beads. We can inject chemotherapy and embolic agents. We can go in just like in that Fantastic Voyage. We can place a catheter, come up through a 2-millimeter incision in the groin, put this catheter into the blood supply of the tumor, and then treat the tumor. So there's diagnostic radiology, there's interventional radiology. We can take complex systems, in this case for prostate cancer, and try to merge MR imaging with ultrasound so biopsy can be performed. Or if we think even more broadly, we in radiology, we serve as the hub for the hospital system. If the dermatology clinic gets flooded, let's just do a little thought experiment. If the dermatology clinic gets flooded, we can't see patients in the dermatology clinic. How does that affect the rest of the hospital system? Yeah, what ends up happening is we've got some people who have rashes. Okay, we have some people who continue to itch. It's bad for them, but fundamentally the rest of the hospital system functions. If the hospital system has a flood in radiology, what happens? You can't send the trauma patients. You can't do complex surgeries. You can't so radiology is a hub, and if we look more broadly, we can see how that also works outside of imaging in terms of social networks, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So think about how you, as a medical student, might engage in a broader system of healthcare. So there are 5 changes that I'm going to be discussing that are happening in medicine that will impact everyone in this room, will impact all of the patients that we will see and try to treat in the future. And if you are interested in a field of radiology or interventional radiology, these might be areas you would want to focus in. If you are not interested in radiology or interventional, they still will be important changes for you to understand so that your practice can harness them. And right off the bat, digital technology, it's absolutely going to disrupt healthcare. And so what do I mean by that? Let's take this. When I was in medical school, who was the smartest student in my class? How would we decide that they were the smartest student?
Ace.
Okay, to answer most questions, and generally, what might that look like? What sort of obscure question? Can any of you as second-year students, is there an obscure question that gets asked to you in your basic science class? The size of a red blood cell. Okay, now, take a wild guess at that. Is it? I'm gonna say 9, and I don't know what the unit is. 7. Okay. I don't know the. So let's say then. So you know the answer. It's 7. What's the unit? Microns. Okay. 7 microns is a red blood cell. And so we're sitting in the pimp rounds, and then you come. You know the attending. Pimping all the students and says, okay, so what's the answer? And you say 7, and you stand out like, wow, you know your stuff, okay? Now, let's bring my 8-year-old son into the mix. My 8-year-old son has this. Okay. So the question gets asked. My 8-year-old son might not know it off the top of his head, but I assure you, he could find the answer very quickly. So the notion of what constitutes a physician and knowledge in general is completely changing. And so the smartest students, from a science perspective, don't necessarily stand out like they used to. And you can take this to the next level. If you're a patient and you type in your set of symptoms, you can often, off of the web, you probably like 3 out of 4 times, like you come up with it in your differential. I mean, like we have, so we as physicians and physicians to be think like, hey, we've got all the knowledge. We're not having all the knowledge anymore. And there will be a time, I guarantee you, when you're practicing, where a patient will show up with a printout and they will know more about the disease that they will do. Like, the world is changing and we need to understand this. And so another example of this is 3D printing. We think of 3D printing as, how many of you have actually used a 3D printer? 1. Anybody else? 2, 3. Okay, so, you know, we think of 3D printing as the super high-tech thing, and it is high-tech, but it can be immensely practical. About a year ago, I couldn't take it anymore. In my home office, all my manila folders were off kilter because I was missing a little bracket. And I contacted the company that I bought my bookshelf from, and they sent me a bracket, and it didn't fit. I couldn't get the bracket to actually put on this little holder, so my manila folders wouldn't fall out. So I went to Ed Donnelly, who's our program director, and I brought him a bracket. I said, "You think you could 3D print me a bracket?" And you know, he just. Next thing I knew, he made out all these brackets. So there's like this concept of, there's a problem that I want to solve, and if I had a device to do it, I'd be able to solve it. And that's what 3D printing allows us to do. And we can actually, if we extend that into the body, we can make these prosthetics. So if we have wounded veterans, they can actually, in a very low-cost setting, we can make prosthetics. Or there's even been 3D printing of the trachea. We can 3D print parts of bone. We can 3D print scaffolding. There's so many opportunities to use 3D printing. And as we look to the future, if we can 3D print pizza, we can do that now. We can 3D print pizza. Why can't we 3D print biomaterials? The FDA has actually approved a 3D printed drug. So there will be a time when instead of perhaps having to memorize the Krebs cycle to the degree that we did, some of us will be able to take 3D printing classes in medical school that will allow us to learn how to do this sort of prototyping and device making. Another opportunity is virtual reality. Can anyone tell me what virtual reality is? Anyone?
Alex.
Is virtual reality like you put on these things that make you look like a dork, and then you kind of like there's virtual reality is something that we'll see in medical education a lot more. The ability to try and learn by experiencing something. It actually will be a tool that allows us to generate empathy. We can think of virtual reality, for instance, if we want to understand the needs of somebody with disabilities, you put on these visors, and you see yourself, okay, so if I'm going to attend a class and I have a disability, like how you sort of see how we design our educational institutions, and they're not necessarily as well designed as we'd like. How is someone with a wheelchair going to get up here? So we might ask is there a way that we can give our students, give our physicians, our nurses the opportunity to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of our patients? Is there a technology that might help us with that? And virtual reality is the answer. I think we're going to see increasingly the use in medicine. Another example of where technology can be used to change things is with a company called Amazon. What is Amazon known for? Everything. Okay. Let's go back 15-ish years ago. What was Amazon known for? Books was their first thing. Okay. And what did Amazon get known for after books? No, in between books and Kindle's still out over here. What came right after books?
Online shop.
Has anyone in this room ever heard of a compact disc? Okay. Before music was streamed, there was this thing like it was kind of reflective, and you would actually get. So Amazon became the place you order music. Amazon sells pretty much everything right now. Yes, go ahead.
So I was on Instagram this morning and I saw but I think it's really cool. They had an ad for Amazon Go, in which you can just put your phone into your pocket and enter one of their stores, and then just grab anything that you want, and then it'll add it to your shopping list, and then charge you to just walk out without paying at that time. And I was like, mind blown.
That's pretty amazing. And so we'll talk a little bit about this too. This the Internet of Things. It's a great segue. Amazon. Where does Amazon make its money? You're saying this stuff? No.
Advertising.
Okay. Anybody else? And I'm using Amazon because Amazon is a great company for you to model yourselves out as a future leader in healthcare. So Amazon has a business model where they make their profit from something that so far nobody has mentioned. What is Amazon the world's leader in? What is it?
Data.
They don't actually. Amazon doesn't make much money this way. They
Data.
don't make their money.
Data.
It's not even advertising.
Data.
Can anyone tell me what Amazon Web Services is?
Yeah, data service.
Which company company is hands down the biggest company in operating a cloud.
The web hosting.
You know, cloud services, where everything's big in cloud. Who owns the cloud? It's Amazon.
Oh.
Oh, so Amazon made a big bet in 2006 that the cloud was where things were going to go, and that if they could use the cloud for their own, you know, all of this stuff and keeping track of everything. So they had to develop cloud services anyway, and then they ended up realizing that you don't have to, once you do the cloud, you don't need to move like heavy items around. Once you've done the infrastructure for it, it's so easy to scale. Amazon makes its money off of the cloud. And there's a lesson there in healthcare and thinking about what you might want to do, and if you want to grow particular aspects of your healthcare services. The second thing, the second dramatic transformation is there's going to be a DNA revolution. DNA revolution, that sounds sort of, you don't buy it. How many of you in the room have heard of this funny, like, what's this CRISPR stuff? Okay. What, functionally, what is CRISPR? Why is CRISPR important? Yeah?
CRISPR allows you to alter genomes.
Okay. So I was a kid in the early 1980s when there was another revolution that happened that has transformed our lives. And what was the revolution in the early 1980s? It was the PC revolution, actually. And that's actually, I'm telling you right now that we're going to enter a new era where there's a DNA revolution. And it will be because of CRISPR. We will alter genes, we will alter DNA, and we will change, like through CRISPR we'll have new plants that will have a particular taste that we'll put on our pizza. There'll be new fruits. There'll be actually new ways of treating human disease. So there's going to be a whole line of therapies, and for any of you interested in interventional radiology, there will be genetic interventional radiologists. That's like, this is really a transformational moment in science right now, and we're right at the tip. Yes.
Does this apply to like minor babies?
Oh, there's an amazing ethical component here, and everybody who's sane agrees that we would never want to do designer babies. There will be many opportunities to treat disease using CRISPR that we haven't fathomed yet. There's Thomson Reuters is a company which measures impact, and they measure impact of publications. And if you look at the 10 most influential publications according to them, 4 of them were on CRISPR. This is in the last 5 years, and 3, like numbers 11, 12, and 13, were on CRISPR, and all in this single issue of Nature. So if we just go out a little bit in time, 7 of the 10 most influential publications in the area of biology will involve CRISPR. This is going to transform how we practice medicine. Now, the third shift numbers will be power. And I'd like to explain that from several different vantage points. I'm intentionally not using the term big data, because if I use the term big data, it's lost all meaning. We've heard that so much, it no longer means anything. I'd like to explain how numbers will allow us to change ourselves. So we heard about Amazon walking in to a store and being able to say whatever you need and then order it directly. Next to my trash can at home, I have a box of the plastic garbage bags, Hefty or Glad or something like that. And so when I get to the end of that box, what do I do nowadays? Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, what happens? Let's even make it simpler. What if it knows I get to the bottom and it just orders it for me? So the Internet of Things. How many of you have heard of this term? The Internet of Things. Okay. So right now, most information on the web is human generated. In one way or another, a human has done something to generate the data. If we look forward to the future, most of the information on the internet won't come from humans. There will be any number of devices, millions and millions of devices, that will be constantly monitoring something in the world and sending that data onto the internet. So the Internet of Things is devices communicating with one another through Wi-Fi. Humans are not required of that. And you might think, well, why is that important? Well, you don't have to order another set of garbage bags. Okay, well, that seems like that's not for human health, but what would be the Internet of Things in terms of implantable devices? So let's peer forward and think in interventional radiology. What if we take an embolic coil and we deliver that into a blood vessel somewhere in the body, and then that coil now is actually sending out information over Wi-Fi that's then going into the medical record. So what if we implanted that in the liver, and that's actually giving us information about the nutrients that we've just eaten, or it's telling us if a tumor has grown? What if it's actually telling us that the genomics of the tumor have changed and we should change the therapy? We just look like there's so many opportunities in medicine that we can use through devices if we use the Internet of Things. What is this?
Data center. A data center.
Watson. What is Watson? Artificial intelligence? So, what is artificial intelligence? And using gobs more data.
Yeah.
And so Watson is, you see articles in the New England Journal of Medicine. There was a recent, last week's issue of JAMA had 3 articles on artificial intelligence. There was a study that was published out of Google where patients' eyes were looked at, and a computer algorithm, essentially a Watson-like process, was used to diagnose eye disease. Didn't need to see a doctor. And we'll see this over and over again in terms of helping you as future physicians take better care of patients. And for radiology, there's all sorts of opportunities to use what's termed machine or deep learning, which are types of artificial intelligence to improve the quality of our image interpretations. So we were talking about artificial intelligence. What sort of the opposite pole of that is crowdsourcing. What is crowdsourcing? What's that?
Putting a question out to the back and giving you answers.
Yeah. If, I don't know, maybe we have 75 students here. If we have a difficult patient, are we better off asking 75 students here, or just having you as the one student? Okay. But what if we scale that now? What if we actually expanded that to hundreds or thousands of students? I mean, the opportunities are enormous. There's actually a crowdsourcing company called CrowdMed. And CrowdMed will connect patients who have symptoms that have not been diagnosed with MDs. MDs are medical detectives. Remember we were talking about with how an 8-year-old might be able to look up something that you wouldn't necessarily need to know the information. If you take crowdsourcing to its logical extreme, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of opportunity to help patients if you can dive into information without being an MD. And this CrowdMed so they'll connect. You can be a medical detective, and you can say I want to be a detective. I want to see what's out there, and I want to try to help. Or you can be a patient and submit your information. And there's many models of this emerging in other areas. So when you take this to the sci-fi, if I was to write my own sci-fi novel, I'd love to have the human race, that our future is pitting artificial intelligence versus crowdsourcing. So humans versus machines. And we're going to see this increasingly. Like, what does that blend look like? How will this change us as physicians? A couple more things. Design thinking. Has anyone here heard of the term design thinking? Can you describe it?
I think it's like the components in which how do you come up to an idea and that add up to it, like the process, the way that you, how do I explain this? The way that you would approach a problem, break it down to its fundamental parts, make sure you have a strong foundation to usually have a good idea.
Yeah, it's really starting at the perspective of the user. So if the user is a patient, trying to understand the needs of the patient to try and design a solution for that patient. And so it requires empathy as its foundation, and it really excels by putting together teams. And you'll, in your medical training, you'll increasingly find yourselves working alongside others, and the vision of the lone wolf physician, like, it's only up to me, I'm the only one who can understand this, that's kind of going to go away. We're going to see design thinking as a tool that will allow us to meet the needs of those we serve. One of the tenets of design thinking is to be comfortable with failure. So failure is not an outcome, failure is not trying, is when you don't try. It's a way to think of it. And as you look down in the future for your own careers, you might find yourself at a bifurcation where you may want to do something and you're afraid you might fail. And I'm often asked, what's the one thing I would do differently in my training? And I would say I would have taken more risks. If you take risks, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But ultimately, when you're young, you can take those risks. Lastly, and this also gets to the tenet of design thinking, diversity breeds success. So when we bring together a group of individuals who share different experiences, different backgrounds, different levels of education, different levels of expertise, we actually generate better ideas. And when we generate better ideas, we as an organization are more successful. And where we see this right now, especially is in the millennial population. So millennials, can anyone give me a rough year when millennials have been, what is the millennial generation?
It's like 85, 86.
It's like if you're born there's slightly different. If you're born in the 80s or 90s, you're a millennial. And if you're a millennial, you were raised in a world where it's termed you're a digital native. You have been raised with digital technology from when you were born. So you think differently. And it's really important for people such as myself who are not millennials to include you in all of our decision making, because you think differently. You will help us who are older than you make better decisions. So I'm now gonna pivot and try to give you some very practical information and answer your questions. And this is really if you want to enter radiology or if you don't want to enter radiology. I think there's still some valuable stuff we can talk about. And I took these questions from what Isaac had sent me. And really this is trying to prepare yourself for a future residency. I was asked, how might you help prepare yourself? And I'm going to give you 3 initial bits of advice. The first is to seek out competitive advantages. So what I mean by that is, if you're applying to a residency and there are 500 applicants, if the majority of the applicants fall into a similar cohort, you need to try to position yourself so you stand out. So I'll say this in another way. Most applicants to residencies will start, they'll have some research experience, and that research experience won't happen till they're the end of the 3rd year or their fourth year. Medical school. Having some research experience will not make you stand out. What will make you stand out is if you get involved with research, if you have a publication. So think of it this way. Many people can enter a race, but only a few people finish the race. So think of opportunities where you can show that you have acquired a skill set that separates you from others. Second thing is, when you go through the rigmarole of preparing your application, there are components like personal statement. Did any of you have to write like these essays for medical? Like, was it fun or painful? Okay, understandably. Now, let's flip it, and let's say you're reading the essays for students who are applying to medical school here. Is it fun or is it painful? It actually, I'm not sure which is more painful, to actually write it or to read. Most of the, like, somehow we've constructed this system where it's painful to write the essays, and it's almost as painful to read them. So if you're writing, when you write your essays, try to tell some sort of story that might sum up the person that you are, how you became the person that you are, something that can make the reader recognize you as a person, and get lots of input. Send your essays out to your buddies. Read each other's. Try to learn and make it interesting. I'm often asked about, what is more important? Is it your preclinical grades? Is it your clinical grades? Is it your boards? Is it your essay? Different residencies will use different metrics. Most residencies will say something like we take a holistic approach. There are in radiology, for instance, having a USMLE of 230 to 235 is often a screening metric that some of the programs will use. We don't use that at Vanderbilt, but I just wanted to give you a sense of that. All right. So, Isaac, should I just take these? What do you want me to do here? Okay.
Thank you so much. Let's give Dr. Vic. Actually, this is supposed to be some more questions for you. If you have any question for Dr. Reed, please go ahead and ask. If you are still,
Yeah, quick question. What is your opinion on the size of a medical school somebody comes from and that impacting their actual ability to get into a program?
So I'm trying to understand. So if the medical school's class size has an impact on getting...
Not the class size, but the size of the medical school. So like when I talk to other directors at other institutions, they'll make a comment saying like, oh, you may come from a small institution, so you have to do a little bit more than somebody who comes from like Vanderbilt, for example, to kind of make yourself more competitive. So I'm asking your view on that.
So I would say it's more related to the number of positions in the residency program you are applying to than it is based on the size of your class of the medical school that you're at. So if you're applying to something like internal medicine, which generally has a lot of spots, there's the class size that you came from will have essentially no bearing if you're applying to neurosurgery, where there may be only several, just a few spots, it actually can start to have a little more of a role, particularly if there's several students from the same medical school applying to that residency. You see, my
I think it's talking about.
Can I rephrase it then, like, does the school you come from make a difference in,
Yeah, like
Prestige.
Harriet may not be as well known as Vanderbilt.
yeah, exactly.
That like, you're coming from like, or Vanderbilt, Harvard, Stanford Medical School, he's saying like, does that affect, like, when you see an applicant from Stanford and you see an applicant from a Harry, do you say, oh wow, this person went to Stanford Medical School?
All right, I see. So, there are some schools that, and they're often the ones that, would be deemed the pedigrees. I mean, if you're at Harvard, I mean, if you look at the class at Harvard, it tends to look a lot like the Northeast and, what have you. The West Coast schools tend to have a West Coast predominance. The East Coast schools tend to have the Midwestern schools tend to not recruit from the coast. There's a geographic component that I think is larger than the institution.
So when you were talking about machines that are feeding information into the cloud, would we implant like machines in the healthy persons just to see if anything's happening to their organs, just if you put in their liver and you feed information? Is that what you were talking about? Not just for persons that are sick?
Yes. So what you're asking is, might we enter an age in the future where we take healthy individuals and see if there's an opportunity to preempt disease? I think that's a really fertile place to be. I think there's the risks and benefits and all of that, but how many have Fitbits right now in this room? So when might we go to an internal Fitbit model? Probably some point.
So you mentioned physician knowledge being less important as external knowledge becomes more accurate in medicine. So what do you think people like new doctors coming in, 30 years down the line, how would our practice look like as far as how much we have to work with those external knowledge? I don't know how to phrase the question, but how much does our knowledge matter in 40 years, 50 years versus what do you think that's going to look like?
Well, you asked a great question, and one thing we know for sure, we're not going to practice the way we do right now, and I actually personally view it as a tremendous opportunity for us to engage much more to meet the needs of our patients. We can spend time understanding what they want, what they need. We can spend more time actually practicing that human connection. Because a machine isn't going to be able to have that capacity, at least at this point.
So you're saying like the information is going to be easily available for us to use, so we can spend more time just learning who that person is, as opposed to researching the actual disease process, the treatment process, for the treatment plan. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so an example might be, we sometimes hear this hypothetically, and we sometimes hear it real. Like, if you had to have heart surgery, would you want the best technical heart surgeon who has no bedside manner, or would you rather have a heart surgeon who has terrific bedside manner, but they're not actually as good technically. So that's going out to the edge, like heart surgery. Okay. Now let's hey, how old are you?
25.
25 years old. You have let's say hypothetically, you know you like eating the salty foods, and you have some mild hypertension. So you're going to go see a physician. When you have mild hypertension, would you rather see somebody who has a great bedside manner, cares about you and understands your needs, might not know as much as like an absolute hypertension expert, but that hypertension expert has no bedside? You sort of see, like you start, there's a calculus that changes, that fundamentally we need to understand what you want. And that's the opportunity that we'll have in medicine to truly understand the needs of our patients. We may think that someone has a long-term knee problem, they're 80 years old, they should get a knee replacement. But actually, they may not want that. We just have to spend more time and understand those needs. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to connect more with patients because of what the machines will allow us to do.
I have a quick question. In recent years, have you all accepted Maharians into your residency program? And if not, why not?
We have. We have.
In recent years?
Yeah. We have. So I showed Brittany Burns up there under design thinking, and we have Elodie Washington. So the two years in a row. Actually, I think they were from the same class.
Superior Boston, and I know I think this is an initiative to really try to push forward using artificial intelligence to really, I guess, help diagnostic radiology.
Uh-huh.
How do you think it's going to impact the demand for MDs wanting to go into that kind of field?
MDs who want to go into radiology?
Right.
I don't think there'll be any field in medicine that Watson won't impact.
Should we be concerned?
So the future leaders in medicine will not be the ones who are afraid of Watson. The future leaders in medicine will be the ones who embrace Watson to augment what they do. And so if we view Watson as competition, and we're afraid of it, and we instead dig our heels down, we're going to be actually disrupted by other practitioners who understand how to use it and practice in a different way. And that's why I think radiology is so well positioned, because of Watson. Questions here?
Okay. I have a question. It's yeah, right. So it's sort of something what Dennis has said, and also the thing about Watson. Do you think that the way AI is moving, something like Watson could actually get in the job of a real-life physician? Because the computations writ large, you know, parameters, so deal with like all the rest of the world. They're gonna tell you this tumor is going to progress this. They're gonna tell you specifics based on, for instance, history or based on even the emotional side you were talking about. So every time you hear this futuristic AI will take over your jobs, I never believe it.
I don't think AI is going to take over our jobs. I think AI will change how we practice.
In what ways?
So I think it will actually allow us to spend more time with our patients. I actually think it's counterintuitively, it's going to allow us to connect more on a personal level.
You talked a little bit about crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
Can you speak to how crowdsourcing affects epidemiology and like how it might affect the future physicians' view of like the flu epidemic or anything that's sort of coming our way? How would that help our preparation for what could come into the clinic?
Well, are you referencing the Google searches for trying to localize flu epidemics? Isn't that really cool? I think that's amazing. I think I think it's that sort of opportunity that we really need to embrace, and understanding how ideas for communicable diseases spread through networks. I think there's so much we can still do related to that.
Thank you so much, guys. If you still have some more questions, you can definitely
Email it, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.